So there's been a lot in the news recently about nuclear Armageddon, right? You've got Putin on one side of the table threatening. You've got the UN saying, hey, you better not do it. We'll fight back. You've got Biden talking about how we're closest to nuclear Armageddon since 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I found this article today, which I thought was pretty interesting, that I wanted to go through some of the details they list out in here. And it's titled, You Can Survive Nuclear War. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about what it's going to be like. You know, nuclear winter, everybody's toast. Might as well just sit on top of my roof and watch the show, that type of mentality. But the truth is that's sort of a flawed, unless you're in the middle of the city, that's a pretty flawed strategy right there. And I'll go through this. Like I said, it talks about ways you can survive it. But even in the beginning of this article right here, they go over how we're still talking about nuclear war here. So it's not like this is going to be sunshine and roses. This is still going to be devastating. It's just not going to be devastating on the level that you've seen in Hollywood movies, the nuclear Armageddon, the complete wasteland afterwards. He goes through why the nuclear Armageddon may not turn out to be that way. He talks about the radiation and all that. He or she, I don't know who it is. But I want to go through a few of those, and I've also got an article over at Survivalist Prepper that goes through some of this as well. But it's just all really interesting because a lot of this is new to me as well, because I sort of had that notion of, holy crap, we're toast. Brian and I did a video over at the Survival Preppers the other day where I used Nuke Map, which is pretty interesting. It's a little thing you can do to kind of drop bombs on where you are and see where the radiation and all that would flow to. And it looks pretty devastating. But as we go through this, maybe your idea of that will change, and it'll seem like you're not as helpless as a lot of people would have you believe. So first, I want to start off in this article talking about this part right here, where they talk about the size of the weapon and, whether it would be a surface burst or an air burst. In this article, they say the largest weapon of choice against a city will likely be an 800 kiloton Topol SS-25 or a 1 megaton Minuteman from the United States. So you're looking at under a megaton, not the super large ones that everybody in the news always likes to talk about, the ones that make the headlines, right? Now, it's highly improbable that a large weapon will be used against a city. More likely, they'll use a 300 kiloton variant. You actually get more bang for your buck with the smaller weapons, and he goes into detail about why that is. You can do more damage with 3 or 4 smaller bombs than you can with that bigger bomb. So in this scenario here, he says, picking on the SS-25, because why not? Someone has to be the bad guy here. Airburst over a city, because city attacks will always be airburst. We have the following data. The fireball radius is 0.88 kilometers. That's slightly more than half a mile for you Americans who can't seem to adapt to the metric system. That would be me and probably a lot of you out there. If you're further out than that, then you survive the fireball. And keep these measurements in mind, because I want to talk about those after I'm done reading this. Moderate blast damage radius is 6.3 kilometers, just above 4 miles. Anything to that point will suffer severe damage and injury. You'll be lucky to survive unless you're in a basement or a reinforced building. The thermal radiation radius is 11.1 kilometers, just short of 7 miles. If you're unlucky enough to be directly exposed to the blast, you're looking at third-degree burns. If you're in a building, around a corner, otherwise protected, even light-colored clothing will protect you. Your chances of coming out increase dramatically. All right, so the last one here, they've got the light damage radius coming out at 18.4 kilometers, about 11 miles. Windows will break and there'll be some structure damage in less sound buildings, but otherwise eminently survivable unless the universe has it out for you and something falls on your head. So you think about that, 11 miles, and he even talks about, so discounting the light damage radius, you're 7 miles away from the center of the blast, you survive. If you're 7 miles away from the center of the blast, you survived it. Now, when you think about this, I have heard recently that we'd get about a 30-minute warning say Russia launched some nukes, you'd get about a 30-minute warning before you would have to, before everything started happening. Now, I don't know, maybe that's different depending on what part of the country you're in. If it's a nuclear submarine, one of those just kind of went missing too, I read the other day, which is interesting. But it's a nuclear submarine, you live in New York, I doubt it's going to be 30 minutes. But here in Colorado, or we may have that 30-minute window. But my point is, in this article, he talks about how it's 11 and a half miles. So to travel 11 miles, if you're going 30 miles an hour, traveling 10 miles takes about 20 minutes. So you would have time to kind of get out of there, but maybe, that really is dependent on a whole lot of different factors. And that's if you live right in the middle of the city. Traffic, if you have early enough warning and you're ahead of the curve, maybe you get out before everybody else starts freaking out and panicking. But most of us, hopefully most of us, don't live in cities. So if we are on the outskirts of the city, there's a better shot of getting further away from that stuff. So 11 miles isn't really that big when you think about it, because a lot of the things we see, you look at, like, if Denver was taken out, you look at just complete devastation all around, right in the center, the whole center of Colorado, just, a crater, right? That may be a little bit dramatic, but it's not really that bad. 11 miles, when you think about how long it takes you to drive 11 miles, or how far 11 miles is from the middle of a city or something, it's not that far. So it's one of those things that people kind of overestimate. In this also, he talks about fallout, which is pretty interesting, because this is one of those that concerns me quite a bit, because you've got 30, 40, 50 bombs dropping. What is, it's basically all of this stuff just circling the globe, and, you can't get away from it and all that. So in this article, they say that if you look at the nuclear planning maps put out by the United States, you'd think that the entire country would be a radioactive wasteland, which makes for cool video games, but it isn't real life. These attack maps were made during the Cold War, when it was assumed that the entire country would suffer 20 megaton bomb surface bursts all over the place. That won't happen. And they go on to say this isn't just wishful thinking. This is that's the practicality of these nuclear weapons. And like he was talking about earlier, you get more bang for your buck with the smaller weapons. You get a larger area of effect with an airburst rather than a surface burst. And with an airburst, you don't get that fallout. All of the, like all of these maps will show you the fallout just going all over the place. An airburst, you don't get that, because the fallout needs particles to attach to. The one thing that I worry about with these airbursts and all that, you've got the EMP factor, right? So what happens with that? And with all of this, I'm not saying that this is something that is super likely. So I don't want to construe that as something like I'm preparing right now for all of this, because I don't know. I'm not willing to say that it's not likely either. I just think it's one of those things that it's easy enough to get the knowledge on this stuff, and I'll go through that in a little bit. Easy enough to prepare as much as you can to just be ready for something like this, that it just makes sense. And if you're preparing already, there's a lot of things you're doing for a situation like this. But at any rate, the airbursts, he's saying that a lot of these are going to be airbursts, especially over cities. Now, if there's hardened target, say Cheyenne Mountain out here, maybe that is a surface burst, or runways and, Air Force bases. Those would be surface bursts. My concern, maybe you're looking at nuclear power plants, which would create a lot of, chaos, radiation and all of that. So, that's one thing with this. This is his opinion, or their opinion on this. There's a lot of other opinions, but nobody really knows what the ramifications would be, what the consequences and the secondary and tertiary events that would happen because of something like this. So it's all just pretty interesting. But at any rate, it goes on to say that as far as the airburst factor, the higher the nuclear weapon is detonated, the larger area of devastation you get, to a point. There's some nice math that works in here where there's an optimal height you want to explode your device. Fortunately, that point for cities is pretty high and yields little fallout. Surface bursts are extremely powerful but have a smaller footprint, which is why city killer missiles explode high in the sky. So going back to those old attack maps, they're outdated and presume an attack that won't happen the way we think it will. Times change. Any country under full-scale nuclear attack is going to get a whole lot of air bursts and some surface bursts, limiting the amount of fallout. So it's, and not to say that there's not going to be any, and radiation is not going to be a concern, but it's not going to be that full-scale. Just lock yourself in the basement for, a month and then you get out and everything is just completely devastated and all of that. Like they said, the world will not be covered knee deep in nuclear fallout. Radiation from fallout also expends a great deal of its energy very quickly, meaning the worst of it doesn't last very long. And he goes into this rule of the 7-10 rule. And I've got an article over at survivalsprepper.net that goes through what he's talking about here It's a little bit easier to explain with this chart right here. This is a good article too, talking about some of the facts and misconceptions about all of this stuff. But this radiation and fallout, I'll pull this up so you can see the chart from my shoulder. But this talks about how quickly this dissipates. So you've got 1,000 rads right here at the top of this chart. And after 1 hour, that 1,000 rads decreases by seven times. So you're looking at 480. So it's half after an hour. And then after 7 hours, you're looking at 100 rads. So it decreases by tenfold, basically. And then after 14 hours, you're looking at 43 rads. And this is why it lasts so long, because that line just kind of levels out there at the bottom and it just goes on and on and on and keeps decreasing like that. But it's pretty good information to have, because it shows, a lot of people have this conception that everything's just going to be a nuclear wasteland. You're not going to be able to go outside for a month and, hide in your bunker. That's just not the case. Granted, it's still going to be bad. I don't want to make this sound like it's not a big deal. It's just like a rainy day or something. It's not. It's still pretty bad. Let me get back to this article here, where they talk about the nuclear winter argument. The next argument against survival is nuclear winter, a popular school of thought that supposes the amount of debris sent into the atmosphere from a nuclear war will send temperatures plummeting, making farming near impossible in the northern hemisphere, maybe even introducing a mini ice age. And he goes on to talk about how this is a bit of a misconception, because when Mount St. Helens burst, it put up a lot more debris and all of that than a nuclear exchange would, and it didn't cause something like that. Now, there is also the fact that that this radiation in the ground, what does that mean for farming? What does that mean for agriculture and food supplies? What does it mean for the economy, this exchange going on? So again, in this article, they're talking about surviving the initial attack, but there's a lot more that goes into all of this stuff rather than just the initial survival. And that's where people sort of get it wrong, like I had mentioned earlier, is saying, hey, we can't survive it, so why even bother? Why even bother trying? In that first 30 minutes, like I talked about, maybe you see people out looting, partying and trying to, live as much as they can in the next 30 minutes because they're going to die. But when you think about it like this, and that you've got that 11 miles, that if you're not inside that 11 miles, you're going to live. And if you're not inside of some sort of shelter or some sort of protection, you're going to live miserably, painfully, and die a slow death. So that whole notion of I'm just going to watch the show, if I was in the middle of downtown, maybe that would be my idea. But anywhere outside of that, I just don't know about that. I would take the precautions, and I think a lot of us do. I would take the precautions that I need to. So the nuclear winter aspect of it, we don't know, but it's one of those that may be a bit overblown by the media and just the people that want you to be really afraid of all of this stuff. And granted, we're talking about nuclear war, right? So it is one of those things that you probably should be pretty afraid of. So running down here, and he just goes through it. Like I'll leave the link to this article and a couple other ones in the show notes below. But he just goes through, or they just go through the math here on how much debris would be up in the air. On this part, he talks about to survive a nuclear war, it takes planning. You can't go about your life and day before the bombs fall, collect your packets of Kool-Aid and think you're going to be okay. A fallout shelter is needed. Radiation sickness is one of the worst ways to die. If you're one of those people who are bound and determined to get out when the bombs go off, you'd better hope you picked your standing area correctly, because if you guessed wrong and you're without shelter, things are looking pretty grisly for you. Fortunately, fallout shelters are not exclusively for the wealthy. A fallout shelter can be constructed by anyone, even with a modicum of skill in your house. And this book, The Nuclear Survival Skills, and I've got the PDF, I've got the link to the PDF below, goes through a whole bunch of information about surviving, things you can do to survive a nuclear exchange. Things that there's some things that you can do that'll give you a little bit of a head start on stuff. Some things that you can do during the situation. But it's just a really neat book. I was looking into it, and there's the PDF version of it's a little wonky because some of the pages are sideways, but it's got, just information after information after information about things that you can do, the aftermath, what you can do, the sort of expedient options. And this was, I think, written mainly for people in Europe that don't have the resources that we have here, especially as preppers. We prep for all this stuff. But there's quite a bit of information in this little book. It's pretty interesting. I've only skimmed it a little bit so far, but I am going to dig into it. One thing I saw on this was this modified Kearney fallout meter. And I think this one is a modified one, but the one in the book is the Kearney meter. I'm actually going to make one of these here in the future because they look pretty cool. And basically, this is a rad detector. And the benefits of this are that it doesn't need to be calibrated like these other dosimeters need to. So it's kind of if you make one of these, which I'm going to do, and I'll do I don't know the ins and outs of it yet because I haven't made it, but once I do, I'm going to put it on my shelf and I'll know more about how it works. But it doesn't need to be calibrated. The downside is it uses static electricity on the inside, so it needs to be charged, which that little wire right there, and he's using a PVC pipe. Again, I don't know exactly how this works. So you charge that, and there's little flaps inside that open up. As soon as radiation hits it, they close up. So it's a one-time use type of thing, but you can charge it again and let it work again. So a really cheap option, and something that can be made, the supplies that you have around your house, something that can be made during a situation if necessary. So again, with that PDF that I was talking about, even just having that, this PDF right here, even just having this downloaded would be, and it's kind of hard to see with me in the way, but even just having this downloaded and in your survival files, it's just got a plethora of information about this stuff. So just a very cool booklet. But at any rate, let's get back to this. Again, this book is just fantastic, and it shows you, or it tells you about all the things that you can do in an event like this. So this part is basically about just be a prepper. Make sure you can survive all of this stuff, and make sure you have this stuff stored. I think as far as preppers and preparing for something like this, we've all got a head start on this, because a lot of the stuff that they talk about in that PDF are for people that really kind of have no clue and don't prepare the average person, right? As preppers, we have a lot of this stuff figured out. We've got the food storage, we've got the water storage, we've got the power outage supplies, and all of those different things. But the difference is how it's stored when you're thinking about fallout and radiation, how it's stored. In that PDF, they talk about putting together your own fallout shelter, which I mentioned a little bit. I haven't dug into that yet, but I am going to check that out and see, some of the guidance and direction that has in there. But it's, as preppers, I think we have a kind of a leg up on all this stuff. But I think it's important, and the reason I did this video I think it is important to know the realities of a situation and not just depend on, hey, I've seen this in a movie, or I've seen that in a movie, or this is what, the prevailing wisdom around a certain subject is, because the last time a bomb was dropped was basically Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and that is the idea we have, those visuals that we have of the devastation, those ground bursts. But what happens, like they were talking about in this article, when there's a whole bunch more air bursts than ground bursts? And what effects does that cause? We always talk about how, or I do anyway, always talk about how an EMP is one of those really unlikely events. And I think it is, just like a nuclear exchange like this. But it is very real when it comes to the air burst in a situation like this. Something would happen. We don't know what. And it drives me crazy. We don't have a lot of data on what a nuclear blast would do. Maybe that, and my conspiracy head is telling me maybe that's intentional. Maybe they don't want that information out because it could be really bad. Or maybe it's absolutely nothing. Maybe nothing is, very few things are going to get affected. That's my frustration. We just don't know what'll happen. My feeling and my planning goes towards the more dire, that everything is going to be shut down to some extent, one extent or another. That's another thing with this nuclear exchange. What types of damage does it do to the infrastructure? What events happen after that? Because it's not like these different countries are going to start launching bombs and then, raise the white flag and say, okay, we're done here. What comes after that? So it's, regardless of how you look at this, yes, like this article says, you can survive it. And, your odds are, you probably want to, because the odds of you being affected by it if you don't do anything are pretty high, and the odds of you dying from it are pretty low unless you live in a city. Dying from it right away, I mean, if you don't take any precautions and you're outside of that blast radius, you're probably going to die. It's just going to take a little bit, and it's going to be painful. So at any rate, there's a lot of stuff that goes into all this nuclear stuff, and it's just kind of on top of my brain right now with all the talk about it. Some things that I just want to make sure that I'm getting ready, not really, concerned about, not afraid or, anything like that. But it's just those things that, hey, I may need to brush up on some of this stuff right here, just in case something pops off. I've got that little bit of extra. I'm a little bit ahead of the curve as opposed to everyone else who's just going to, put their sunglasses on and watch the show. Good luck with that. But at any rate, if you guys have any comments, any suggestions, anything like that in this, like I said, I've got the links to my article over at Survivalist Prepper. I've got this article right here, and I've got the PDF. And I am going to make that little Kearney dosimeter radiation detector thing here in the near future. I just want to use it and test. I don't know how I'm going to test it out. We'll figure something out, but I want to have it and just, stick it on my shelf, and you just never know. So at any rate, I appreciate everyone watching today. Take care and prepare. We'll talk to you all later.